Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Leah's Library. I'm sorry that I was gone for so long, but I'm back today and I'm starting a whole new series called Tales from the Quarantine. So here we are in this crazy year 2020, and we are all under quarantine, and I figured this was a great time to get caught up on some of our stories. So the three stories we're going to read today all have to do with magic, because I think we could all use a little magic in our days today and tomorrow and the day after. So keep coming back because I'll have lots of good stories. The first one is called A Fairy Went A-Marketing by Rose Fyleman, illustrated by Jamichael Henterly. The second one is called Mr. Brown's Fantastic Hat, written by Ayano Imai. And forgive me if I'm butchering these names. I'm doing the best I can with my limited experience with foreign names. The third one is called Sylvester and the Magic Pebble by William Steig. All right, let's start with A Fairy Went A-Marketing. I love this story so much because the illustrations are just beautiful. Look at that lovely fairy. Let's see what she does. A Fairy Went A-Marketing by Rose Fyleman, illustrated by Jamichael Henterly. She's weaving a basket. A fairy went a-marketing. She bought a little fish. Look at that market there. It's the fish stall. It's got tadpoles and a little turtle. And some seafood, it looks like. She's got raspberries in her basket. There's a mole selling flowers. She put it in her crystal bowl upon a golden dish. An hour she sat in wonderment and watched its silver gleam. And then she gently took it up and slipped it in the stream. She set the fish free. A fairy went a-marketing. She bought a colored bird. It sang the sweetest, shrillest song that she had ever heard. She sat beside its painted cage and listened half the day. And then she opened wide the door and let it fly away. She set it free. A fairy went a-marketing. She bought a winter gown. It was all stitched about with gossamer and lined with thistledown. Brr, looks cold. She wore it all the afternoon with prancing and delight. Dancing through the snow. I love to do that. Then gave it to a little frog to keep him warm at night. She knew she had a warm home to go back to. A fairy went a-marketing. She bought a gentle mouse. Oops. There we go. take her tiny messages and tidy up her house. All day she kept its busy feet pit-pattering to and fro. And then she kissed its silken ears, thanked it, and let it go. And there she is, sitting by the water's edge. Let's see here. What does she see in the water? There's the fish that she let go. And there's the mouse. There's the bird. There's the frog. All the creatures that she helped. I like this story because she seems to be a very thoughtful little fairy. A fairy went a-marketing. The second book we got from our library, which unfortunately is closed down at the moment. But when the libraries do open back up, you'll be able to check these out at your local library. This one is called Mr. Brown's Fantastic Hat by Ayano Imai. It is a special kind of hat. Look at all those little doors. Mr. Brown lived alone. People were frightened of him and stayed away. Mr. Brown had no friends, and he didn't want any. He had a smart hat that he would wear when he went out for long walks. He told himself that life was perfect without anybody fussing over him. But secretly, Mr. Brown was very lonely. One day, while Mr. Brown was sleeping, a woodpecker flew down and started tapping a hole in his hat, thinking, what a wonderful nest this hat would make. I like how the teacup is perched on the branch and his cup is his book is hanging by a string. When Mr. Brown woke up and saw what had happened, he was shocked. He didn't like anybody coming near him. But that was only the start. The woodpecker soon told all his friends about the wonderful new home and invited them all to join him. Then the woodpecker pecked more holes in the hat. "No, stop it at once!" shouted Mr. Bear. But Mr. Brown couldn't stop the birds from coming. Then, to his amazement, something magical happened. As more and more birds arrived, the hat grew taller and taller. At first, Mr. Brown had no idea what to do, but slowly he started to enjoy the birds' singing, as well as their company. His life certainly was not dull any longer. Wow, look at that fantastical hat. Now Mr. Brown loved to show off his hat. Everywhere he went, it was full of the music of singing birds. Other people thought that this was a wonderful idea, and they started to copy Mr. Brown. And soon everyone began wearing very tall hats. But the birds preferred to stay with Mr. Brown, no matter how hard people tried to persuade them. Sometimes they all went down to the beach, and Mr. Brown would look out over the sea as they flew above him. That looks like a lovely place to sit and watch the birds. One cold autumn morning, Mr. Brown woke to take food out to the birds, only to find that they had all flown away. He felt very sad. Why would they leave him? Would he ever see his friends again? Maybe his life would be quiet once more. But he missed his new friends. I don't care where they have gone, really I don't, Mr. Brown said to himself as he prepared some food for them, just in case. I'm not worried about them at all, he said, looking out his window each day. But even Mr. Brown couldn't convince himself that that was true. Because he did miss his friends, didn't he? And he looked for them every day. The days became shorter and shorter and colder. It was time to hibernate for the winter. But Mr. Brown tried hard to remain awake. Who would look after the birds if they returned? Eventually his eyelids closed and he fell into a deep, deep sleep. Snow fell gently and everything was quiet. But if you listened very carefully, you could hear Mr. Brown snoring. Outside all was quiet, and everything was covered with a blanket of snow. One morning Mr. Brown woke up to the sounds of knocking. He had been dreaming of the birds and felt he could still hear them singing. The knocking seemed to be coming from outside. He opened the door. What did he see? It was spring, and there was the woodpecker again. While Mr. Brown was sleeping, his hat had grown roots and became a tall tree with branches and fresh new leaves. The birds had spent the winter in warmer lands and had now returned to their home. Mr. Brown was so happy to see his friends. At last he could admit that this was better than being alone. The end. And look at all those birds in their cute little houses. And that is a picture of the person who wrote the book, Ayano Imai. What a magical hat that was. Can you imagine having a fantastic hat and having birds move in? I love the sound of bird song. Our last story today, you might be familiar with it. It's a pretty popular one. Sylvester and the Magic Pebble by William Steig. Sylvester Duncan lived with his mother and father at Acorn Road in Oatsdale. One of his hobbies was collecting pebbles of unusual shape and color. On a rainy Saturday, during vacation, he found a quite extraordinary one. It was flaming red, shiny, and perfectly round, like a marble. He was studying this remarkable pebble. He began to shiver, probably from excitement, and the rain felt cold on his back. I wish it would stop raining, he said. And to his great surprise, the rain stopped. It didn't stop gradually as rain usually does. It ceased. The drops vanished on the way down. The clouds disappeared. Everything was dry, and the sun was shining as if the rain had never existed. In all his young life, Sylvester had never had a wish gratified so quickly. It struck him that the magic must be at work, and he guessed that the magic must be in the remarkable-looking red pebble, where indeed it was. To make a test, he put the pebble on the ground and said, "I wish it would rain again." Nothing happened. But when he said the same thing, holding the pebble in his hoof, the sky turned black, there was lightning and a clap of thunder, and the rain came shooting down. "What a lucky day this is," thought Sylvester. "From now on, I can have anything I want. My father and mother can have anything they want. My relatives, my friends, and anybody at all can have everything that anybody wants." He wished the sunshine back in the sky, and he wished a wart off of his left hind fetlock that would disappear. And it did. And he started home, eager and amazed to show his parents his amazing new magic pebble. He could hardly wait to see their faces. Maybe they wouldn't even believe him at first. As he was crossing Strawberry Hill, thinking of some of the many, many things he could wish for, he was startled to see a mean, hungry lion looking right at him from behind some tall grass. He was frightened. If he hadn't been so frightened, he could have made the lion disappear, or he could have wished himself safe at home with his father and mother. He could have wished the lion would turn into a butterfly or a daisy or a gnat. He could have wished many things, but he panicked and couldn't think carefully. I wish I were a rock," he said, and he became a rock. The lion came bounding over, sniffed the rock 100 times, and walked around and around it, and went away, confused, perplexed, puzzled, and bewildered. "I saw that little donkey clear as day. Maybe I'm going crazy," he muttered. And there was Sylvester, a rock on Strawberry Hill, with the magic pebble lying right beside him on the ground, and he was unable to pick it up. "Oh, how I wish I were myself again," he thought, but nothing happened. Had he been touching the pebble to make the magic work, but there was nothing that he could do about it. His thoughts began to race like mad. He was scared and worried. Being helpless, he felt hopeless. He imagined all the possibilities, and eventually he realized that his only chance of becoming himself again was for someone to find the red pebble and to wish that the rock next to it would be a donkey. Someone would surely find the red pebble. It was so bright and shiny. But what on earth would make them wish that a rock were a donkey? The chance was 1 in a billion at best. Sylvester fell asleep. What else could he do? The night came with many stars. Meanwhile, back at home, Mr. and Mrs. Duncan paced the floor, frantic with worry. Sylvester had never come home later than dinner time. Where could he be? They stayed up all night wondering what had happened, expecting that Sylvester would surely turn up by morning. But he didn't. Of course, Mrs. Duncan cried a lot, and Mr. Duncan too, and he did his best to soothe her, that they both longed to have their dear son home with them. "I will never scold Sylvester as long as I live," said Mrs. Duncan. At dawn they went about inquiring of all the neighbors. Inquiring means asking. They're asking all the neighbors if they'd seen Sylvester. They talked to all the children, the puppies, the kittens, the colts, the piglets. None had seen Sylvester since the day before yesterday. They went to the police. The police could not find their child. All the dogs in Oakdale went searching for him. They sniffed behind every rock and tree and blade of grass, into every nook and gully of the neighborhood and beyond. But not a scent of him was found. They sniffed the rock on Strawberry Hill, but it smelled like a rock. It didn't smell like Sylvester. After a month of searching the same places over and over again, and inquiring of the same animals over and over again, Mr. and Mrs. Duncan no longer knew what to do. They concluded that something dreadful must have happened, and that they would probably never see their son again, though all the time he was less than a mile away. They tried their best to be happy, to go about their usual ways. But their usual ways included Sylvester, and they were always reminded of him. They were miserable. Life had no meaning for them any more. Night followed day, and day followed night, over and over again. Sylvester on the hill woke up less and less often. When he was awake, he was only hopeless and unhappy. He felt he would be a rock forever, and he tried to get used to it. He went into an endless sleep. The days grew colder and colder. Fall came with leaves changing color. Then the leaves fell, and the grass bent to the ground. Then it was winter. The winds blew this way and that. It snowed. Mostly the animals stayed indoors, living on the food they had stored up. One day a wolf sat on the rock that was Sylvester and howled because he was so hungry. Then the snows melted, the earth warmed up, and the spring sun, things budded. Leaves were on the trees again, flowers showed their young faces. One day, Mr. Duncan insisted that his wife go with him on a picnic. "Let's cheer up," he said. "Let us try to live again and be happy, even though our dear Sylvester, our angel, is no longer with us." They went to Strawberry Hill. Mrs. Duncan sat down on the rock. The warmth of his own mother sitting on him woke Sylvester from a deep winter sleep. He wanted to shout, "Mother, Father, it's me, Sylvester, I'm right here!" But he couldn't talk. He had no voice. He was stone dumb. Mr. Duncan walked aimlessly around while Mrs. Duncan set out the picnic food on the rock. Alfalfa sandwiches, pickled oats, sassafras salad, Timothy compote. Suddenly Mr. Duncan saw the red pebble. "What a fantastic pebble!" he exclaimed. "Sylvester would have loved it for his collection." He put the pebble on the rock. They sat down to eat. Sylvester was now wide awake as a donkey that was a rock could possibly be. Mrs. Duncan felt some mysterious excitement. "You know, Father," she said suddenly, "I have the strangest feeling that our dear Sylvester is still alive and not far from us." I am, Sylvester wanted to shout, but he couldn't. If only he had realized that the pebble resting on his back was the magic pebble. "Oh, how I wish he were here with us on this lovely May day," said Mrs. Duncan. Mr. Duncan looked sadly at the ground. "Don't you wish it too, Father?" she said. He looked at her as if to say, "How can you even ask that question?" Mr. and Mrs. Duncan looked at each other with great sorrow. "I wish I were myself again. I wish I were myself again," thought Sylvester. And in less than an instant, he was! You can imagine the scene that followed. The embraces, the kisses, the questions, the answers, the loving looks, and the fond exclamations. They are so happy. When they had eventually calmed down a bit and had gotten home, Mr. Duncan put the magic pebble in an iron safe. Someday they might want to use it, but really, for now, they had more than they could ever wish for. they all had what they wanted: each other. The end. Sylvester and the Magic Pebble. Okay, well, there we go. Thanks, everybody. Have a really great day and stay well and healthy out there. I'll be back soon with some more stories to help keep you entertained. Bye!